Hello everyone, we are today at the Parisian Military Academy with Colonel Dr. Reisner.
Hello, nice to meet you.
And I have a special question for him, namely, what are the lessons learned on the tactical level from the Ukraine war so far?
Well, this is one of the key questions we have to answer, and we have to look a little bit more into detail what is happening in Ukraine actually. And to make it more understandable, I would say that we actually use several factors to analyze this question. So the first factor is of course time, then we have for space, then we have of course the factor of information and the factor of force. So what we see is that all the classical capabilities which we have seen also in the recent years when it comes to warfighting are relevant also today, but there are several things which are sticking out a little bit in the situation in Ukraine. For example, it is a matter of fact that drones have a huge impact on what's going on. Drones in different domains. So we have land drones, we have of course drones which are in the air present, and we have of course sea drones, for example. And those drones affect those four mentioned factors. So I would say that the capabilities more or less are the same like we have seen it in the past, but with the factor of the use of drones, we have a different picture compared to the past. What do I mean in detail? What we see is what we call the so-called transparent battlefield. So it means that the drone gives you the possibility to observe what the enemy is doing actually. So there is no staging anymore because drones actually can identify those staging areas and you can immediately work on them by using artillery or other assets. And of course there's also not a very limited maneuver, because when you go into the maneuver, the drone can work on you too, not only by reconnaissance, but also by actually attacking you. Because when you look in detail what's going on in Ukraine, then you see a lot of so-called first-person view drones or kamikaze drones, and they work on these maneuver elements. And in the end, and this is the paradoxon, we have the same situation which we have seen in the First World War. So the machine gun and the barbed wire made the situation nearly, how should I say, unsolvable for the variant factions. And here today, and this is the paradox thing, by the use of drones we have pretty much the same. So there's no staging, no maneuver, and there is the question, how can we actually solve this tactical problem? So this is one of the things I would say is the most important, which we can see on the tactical level.
So basically instead in the First World War it was firepower and counter mobility that stopped everything, and now it's basically information combined with firepower.
Right, exactly. That's what we actually call this transparent battlefield. You have a clear picture of what's going on the battlefield. You have 10,000s of drones along the front line. Those drones are observing what both variant factions are doing. And if there is some kind of a staging which is identified, or if there is some kind of maneuver, the drones, the artillery or other weapons can actually work on them. And so you need some kind of a, how should I say, secret weapon, especially in the electromagnetic field, to for example, work on the up and down link to solve this problem. This is also what General Zaluzhny wrote in his essay when he said, okay, he needs something like the gunpowder the Chinese invented to solve this problem pretty much. And there is still no answer, because the question is how we can overcome this stalemate actually by these technologies.
You mentioned the other factors like...
Well, there is space actually, it's force of course, it's information and it's time. And all these four factors are more or less influenced by the use of drones. By using a drone actually you can work in a bigger space more or less when it comes to the battlefield. You can significantly increase the amount of your force, because all these little drones pretty much work as some kind of a assault fleet pretty much on the enemy. You have the big advantage that you reduce the targeting cycle when it comes to time, for example, because you observe a target and immediately, and for example the Ukrainians, they have very, very clever and sophisticated solutions. You can immediately work on the enemy in a very, very short time frame, up to 3-4 minutes, for example.
So basically the OODA loop is really short.
Right, it's really short, and of course the factor which we also have to consider, so space, force, time.
Information.
Information. Well, this is what the drone actually brings into the game, the information which you need for the other factors.
In the First World War, the solution were basically...
the tank.
And also the stormtrooper tactics.
Yes, what we also see in Ukraine actually, because they changed the tactics. Also when you look back into the phase of the so-called spring or summer offensive of the Ukrainian, which finally failed. But they tried, general solution, they tried to change the situation by using the same tactics like we have seen in the First World War, small stormtrooper tactics which were used there. And also the Russians are doing this, by the way. Yeah.
But the fall offensive in 2022 was basically that the Russians had almost no defensive line from what I know. They had like one weak line, but now they have like almost
I guess you're referring to Kharkiv and Kherson, and this is completely different because in Kharkiv it was pretty much the principle of surprise which made that success possible for the Ukrainians, and in Kherson there was pretty much a deal which made it possible for the Russians to withdraw the troops on the other side and to advance for the Ukrainians and to more or less liberate Kherson in that case. Yeah.
But a surprise like in Kharkiv is not possible anymore because the Russians now really dug in, right?
Right. The situation is that after the victory of Kiev, Kharkiv and Kherson, the Russians gained time, 7 months, to dig in more or less in the Zaporozhye area, which finally led to the fact that the Ukrainian offensive failed. Yeah? And at the moment we have the problem that we are following more or less all the principles of a war of attrition. So it's a question of resources, it's not a question of quality, and it's not a question of maneuver or things like that, or even some certain weapon systems. It's a question of resources. Yeah? And you can see that from time to time, the Ukrainians are coming up with spectacular success. But of course, you have to do this in a certain time frame on a daily basis to really corner the enemy, in that case, the Russians. And this is not happening, factually. Yeah? Therefore, you need, I would say, for example, just to give you one example, hundreds of attack camps which you use day by day over a certain time frame, and then you really have an impact. Or an air force which is not available for the Ukrainians.
From my understanding, when I interviewed a German former combat engineer that served in Ukraine, basically the Russians are really good in counter mobility, basically digging in mines, several, and then deploying mines. So, which kind of reminds us of the Second World War, of the Battle of Kursk, where there were several levels. What is actually the NATO doctrine to deal with this amount of counter mobility? Because this deals back to the Cold War as well.
Well, as you know, NATO and of course the United States have several manuals which also try to consider what we have to do in case of, let's say, we are facing an enemy who is more or less dug in a very sophisticated trench system. So there's, for example, the term of SOSRA, which you, I think you know. So the certain things you have to more or less, the certain things you have to consider if you attack such an enemy. And on the other side, when you look at what the Russians are doing, you just have to look in the old playbooks from the Soviet times, because it's exactly from the book what you actually see there. But the core thing which we have to understand is that the military only works precisely and successfully if there are all the different branches available. This is the core thing we have to understand here. If you just have a good land force, but no air force, then you have a problem. And just to give you one example, when you look back into the Second World War, Operation Cobra, for example, Operation Cobra was a success because the Americans bombed pretty much the trenches of the Germans heavily with a devastating effect. So the Panzerlehr division was pretty much annihilated, and then 3 armored divisions broke through. But this was missing in the case of the offensive in Zaporozhye, because there was no preliminary bombardment from the Ukrainians, because they had no assets. So that what happened is that they actually attacked into the defense lines of the Russians, and the Russians, with a mixture of different capabilities, starting with combat helicopters, starting with mobile anti-tank teams, starting with minefields, starting with artillery, and of course also with the Air Force, not only the helicopters but also fixed-wing aircraft, they actually in a very short time frame broke the advancing Ukrainians. For the moment, thanks a lot. Thanks for your interest. Very, very interesting times we're living in. Why? Because we see that technology is changing a lot. I would say a lot of still not understood what's going on here. There is a huge discussion. Do we see a revolution already of warfare, or is it still an evolution of warfare? I would say we are already closing into a revolution, because we have to accept that all the manuals we have to be changed because of the factor unmanned systems really have on the battlefield. We just recently saw a video where we were able to identify land systems, Russian ones, fighting against Ukrainian positions, and then they were attacked by Ukrainian first-person view drones. So that was really some kind of a battle in between robots, and that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's coming up in the future. And I would say when it comes to the military, we can expect a lot of nasty surprises in the near future.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, all the best. All the best to your channel.
Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.